Over the years, I've noticed that my family has begun to eat more organic food products. However, I've also noticed that my family has begun to question if eating organic actually means anything. For example, isn't it easy to just simply say that a food product is organic when it's really not? This has all led me to wonder if eating organic, besides the fact that it's simply healthier, is doing any good in our bodies. I've also heard people use the term GMO, and this has led me to wonder what a GMO is, and why are so many markets like Whole Foods now on the rise? Before we begin, I just want to clarify that an organic crop is the same thing as a non-GMO crop. So let's start off by talking about what a GMO is. A GMO is an organism whose genetic material has been changed to help the organism in some way. Usually, this is done by taking the DNA from one organism and inserting it into another organism for some purpose. Let me give you an example. Let's say you have a protein from one crop. This protein is known to be healthy. By using genetic engineering, you can take this healthy protein out of the crop and insert it into another crop. Also, GMOs have been engineered to produce their own insecticide. Let me give you another example. Let's say you have a genetically modified tomato. What this means is that the genetic material of this tomato has been changed to help the tomato in some way. This can mean that the tomato is now insect resistant, drought resistant, pest resistant, herbicide resistant, etc. So if an insect were to try to eat this tomato, the insect would immediately die and the tomato would not be affected. So GMOs were introduced into the world to help us. Since drought, insects, pests, herbicides, and other factors are no longer affecting these crops, more of these crops can now be produced. This is specifically a big help for third world countries where starvation tends to be a big issue. If GMOs are here to help the world, why are so many food companies now making non-GMO food products? This leads me to the more negative side of GMOs. First off, the introduction of GMOs has led to an increase in food allergies. According to the Institute for Responsible Technology, genetically modified soy entered the U.S. food supply in the later part of 1996. And then from 1997 to 2002, U.S. peanut allergies increased. This is because by using genetic engineering, you can take a protein out of an allergenic food and insert the protein into a safe food or a food that is not known to trigger an allergic reaction. The New England Journal of Medicine conducted a study where they took a gene from a Brazil nut and inserted it into a soybean. I want to mention that a Brazil nut is a known allergenic food, whereas the soybean is a safe food. So as expected, people who had known allergies to nuts had an allergic reaction when consuming this genetically modified soybean, because it contained the gene from the Brazil nut. Also, genetic engineering can create many new proteins that are foreign to our bodies. Since our bodies are not familiar with these proteins, our immune system and our antibodies are activating, causing an allergic reaction. There's an example of this in the Impossible Burger, a genetically modified soy burger. According to Dr. Perro, an integrative pediatrician, she explains that the Impossible Burger is created by taking a genetically modified part of a burger called soy nodule and a part of a plant called soy-like hemoglobin. These new proteins that were created in the process of making this burger taste like a meat are actually foreign to our bodies. As a result, people have been reporting allergic reactions after consuming this Impossible Burger. In addition to GMOs causing a rise in food allergies, GMOs are also damaging our intestinal lining. BT corn is a very commonly eaten corn in the US. BT contains a bacterium called Bacillus thuringiensis, and BT produces a protein called cryprotein. Now, this protein acts as an insecticide. What this means is that if an insect were to try to eat this BT corn, the insect would immediately die and the corn would not be affected. Now, the problem with BT corn is that it is making our gut leaky. What this means is that the consumption of BT corn is damaging our intestinal lining and preventing the filtration of substances coming into our bodies. So, these harmful substances that are not being filtered are actually flowing into our bloodstream, and our bodies are creating an autoimmune reaction. This autoimmune reaction can cause gastrointestinal problems, fatigue, joint pain, etc. Just like some crops have been genetically engineered to produce their own insecticide, like BT corn, other crops have been genetically engineered to resist the spray of herbicides, specifically Roundup, a very commonly used herbicide in the US. So, Roundup can now be sprayed on all unwanted weeds and plants, but it won't kill the actual crop. Instead of killing the crop will now absorb the herbicide because it's been genetically engineered. This also allows farmers to spray even more of Roundup because they know that their crops will not be affected. Roundup contains a specific ingredient called glyphosate. According to Carrie Gillum, an investigative journalist, glyphosate usage has gone from 123 million pounds to 2 billion pounds annually since the 1990s. And according to the International Agency for Research on Cancer, glyphosate may be carcinogenic to humans, meaning it may be causing cancer in human beings, due to evidence that it is carcinogenic in experimental animals. In addition, the International Agency for Research on Cancer reported a link between non-Hodgkin lymphoma and glyphosate. And in 2019, the US Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry reported that there was an increased risk of cancer with the exposure of glyphosate. However, unfortunately, members of the EPA and Monsanto, the creators of glyphosate, tried to hide this report. In addition to glyphosate possibly causing cancer in human beings, it's also killing beneficial gut bacteria, and it's preventing the body from being able to absorb vitamins and minerals. So it's clear that GMOs are causing many problems in our bodies. But where does this problem come from? Monsanto. Monsanto is an American chemical company that is producing these genetically engineered seeds. Monsanto is amongst the big 6 chemical companies that pretty much rule the industry for genetically engineering seeds. The big problem with Monsanto is that they're hiding information from us, the consumers of their own seeds. There have been many cases that have shown that Monsanto knows their products are harmful, but they're trying to hide it from the public. According to Dr. Pero, she explains that Monsanto knew that the World Health Organization was going to declare glyphosate as carcinogenic back in 2015. And when Monsanto found this out, they tried to discredit the arm of the World Health Organization. In the book Modified GMOs and the Threat to Our Food, Our Land, Our Future, Dr. Fani Hatijina, a scientist, explains that Monsanto does their own research on their own seeds. Does that seem very trustworthy? And Dr. Pero also explains that there are lobbyists from these big agro-businesses in our own government. So our government is also not protecting us. So you may be thinking, if GMOs are bad for me, I'll just not eat them. Unfortunately, it's hard to do this because of the lenient labeling laws in the US. The National Engineered Food Disclosure Law now requires the labeling of GMO food products starting in 2022. However, there are some exceptions to this law that work against giving consumers the right to know exactly what they're eating. For example, this law does not require the labeling of processed and refined GMO food products. This law also requires that GMOs are labeled as bioengineered food, instead of just simply labeling it as a GMO. This confusing wording is a way to trick the consumer. And lastly, this law has no established fine or consequence if any company were to try to break it. So although there is some progress being made on labeling laws, consumers still need more information on what they're eating. It is unjust that processed and refined GMOs do not need to be labeled when a majority of GMO food products have been processed and refined. You may be wondering, are organic and non-GMO food products safe to eat? Honestly, we don't even know, and this is because of contamination. Contamination is another big issue because many farmers are still growing organic crops on organic fields. However, it's very likely that these genetically modified seeds are mixing into these organic fields from wind, birds, etc. So when we eat organic, we can never be 100% sure that there is no contamination. Monsanto also requires that farmers pay a fee for reusing their seeds. Monsanto's genetically modified seeds are blowing into these organic fields, and Monsanto is finding their seeds in these fields, and they're suing these farmers for reusing their seeds without paying, when in reality, it's very likely that these seeds were unintentionally mixed into these fields. So what's the solution to this problem? Sometimes we don't realize it, but food is such an important part of our lives. Right now, while we're facing a pandemic, keeping our gut clean and our immune system strong should be our top priority. As consumers, we have to be more aware and cautious when buying food. Buying more food products that are labeled as organic and non-GMO is a way to prevent ourselves from possibly causing harm in our own bodies.